welcome to episode 69 of Glass Onion on John Lennon. So there's no protracted intro today, not going to be scrambling around trying to find things to talk about. We go straight in, and this is the long-awaited listener audio questions. Just before I get to that, a quick shout out. I was contacted recently by Tim Riley, who many years ago wrote a very good Beatles book called Tell Me Why, which I definitely recommend. Deep dive into their music. And he also wrote a book, Lennon, The Definitive Life, The Man, the Myth, the Music, which came out, I think, in 2011. I will get to that, and I will get Tim on the show. But the reason he contacted me was to send a piece that he wrote about Plastic Ono Band, which, of course, the box set just came out. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes, and you can expect to see Tim on the show in the future. Anyway, without further ado, so we're into today's episode. So I'm absolutely delighted to have my, I'm going to say, old friend. What does that mean? We've never met. I mean, yeah. But the man who was in the only ever Glass Onion three-parter as of now, which was the Ballad of John and Elvis, episodes 57 to 59. David Wills, popularly known as Ghosty. How are you doing, mate?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here for this Q&A session where I can chime in and sprinkle pearls of wisdom.
Pearls of something.
I am by no means an expert. I might know, as much as the most crazed fan, but that's about it. So everything I say, take it with a grain of salt. That's the warning up front.
Well, there's no wrong answers today. We got some really good questions. No less than 26, in fact. For anyone who doesn't know about this, about a month ago, I think I solicited some questions, and I thought it would be a nice gimmick, let's call it, to have them in audio form. So the listeners could literally be on the show. And when I asked for a question, some people took that as 2 questions. Some people took that as 3 questions. One person took that as 4 questions. But hey, the more the merrier, not complaining. Anyway, for those bad people who haven't heard our previous talk, Ghosty, you can just introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I am a radio host / voice actor who is not only a fan of John Lennon and the Beatles, but also Elvis. Hence, we had that epic 3-part discussion about Elvis and lots of other things. I'm often a guest on the Zilch podcast for the Monkees. I've been doing that for a number of years, hither and yon, all over the podcasting world.
Yeah,
these days, it seems.
Yeah, you're on a couple of Elvis ones. You're on Two Legs. What else? Ken Michaels?
Yes, right. Yeah, Ken Michaels. It all stemmed from this one, really. I don't think people realized I was a fan of the Beatles until I did this show.
Well, it must be nice for you because you obviously spend a lot of your time asking other people questions, so it must be lovely to be a guest.
Yes, it actually is nice to be on the other side of that microphone.
I've done a few guest things as well. It's just really nice.
And it's funny because we're always talking about how different it feels, but it's the exact same setup. We're sitting in the same room using the same equipment that we would normally use to be the host, and yet it feels remarkably different when the tables are turned in the ether and we're the guest on someone else's show. It does have a difference.
Well, yeah, and to be perfectly honest, the fact that you don't have to edit must be a good thing. Yeah, that's the thing I love, actually, as well as being on people's shows. Because I was on the Elvis show, like TCB classes. Fantastic.
Right. Yeah, you hear it back and you're like, I didn't have to do anything.
Yeah. It's just it, isn't it? And Gadeep, asking some good questions. And Gadeep was really quiet. He said at the end, oh, sorry about that. I was really enjoying listening to you two talking.
Right.
And he said, it's great. It's like listening to a podcast, but then you could chime in as well and people will listen to you.
Right.
So that was
yeah, they do a great show. Their show's really, really good. TCB cast, yeah.
Love it. All right. I reckon we should get straight to it. So I'm going to play these recordings to you and the listeners. Just to tell you, actually, there's some listeners brought them in, some former guests. I contacted some celebrity friends that you'll definitely know, former guests and so forth, authors, podcasters. And there's one surprise one that I'm keeping from you. Question 13, somewhere in the middle there. So you can look forward to that.
What is Hank Marvin calling in?
No, more famous than that.
Oh, my goodness.
Are we ready for question 1?
Sure.
Hey, Anthony. Chris from Atlanta here. If you were hanging out with John mid-70s and you had your guitar with you, what would be the first song you would play while around him? Thanks for everything. Love all your pods. Take care.
All right. Let me let you go first. Imagine you were a guitarist. What would you play? What do you think? What do you think John Lennon would like to hear in the mid-70s? Like, say, Lost Weekend? Or...
Well, if I were a guitarist, I think I would probably play something by Carl Perkins or Eddie Cochran just to get on his side, right? Because that would be all of his go-to jam stuff. And that's, I think, hearing recordings, I guess it's that 1980 session where like the Star Wars is being in the background and you hear him with the band and they're trying to play Beatles songs and he's like, I don't know anything past 65.
Yeah.
You know, he always wants to go back to 50s. I think that's kind of what you'd have to play in order to keep his interest. Yeah.
Well, judging from our last conversation, Elvis would seem to be thorny because he seemed to either love him or think he died when he went to the army. He's wearing an Elvis pin. He's got very... I think you made the point last time. It was very interesting that him and maybe even George as well got stuck in this teenage dream of Elvis. So I would probably keep away from Elvis. The ones I would play, I love Memphis, Memphis, Tennessee. There's something about that. I don't really particularly like the version that him and Chuck did on the Mike Douglas show, but I mean, that was off the cuff. But I'd go Memphis, Tennessee. But another one from the amazing live at the BBC, Lonesome Tears in Your Eyes. You know that one?
Oh, yeah.
Dorsey Burnett, yeah. I think I'd try and like play in something that wasn't too obvious. So I'd try and catch him out and he'd go, oh, yeah, 1963. And then he'd tell me to fuck off, but he'd be impressed first. Anyway.
You'd prove your mettle right at the very beginning.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Chris, for that. And Chris actually had another question. I can't remember what happened. I think he sent me a long recording and did politely ask everyone to keep them fairly short. But he had another question. Who would John have collaborated with post-1980? So if you don't mind, I'm going to go first. The one that I'm almost certain about, and I've said this a million times on the show, Kurt Cobain. I mean, they may never have met, but if they'd met, I just feel like they would have bonded, like the childhood thing, family issues and everything. So I feel like Cobain, definitely. I'm sure Ringo, they were going to do something, weren't they? What was Ringo's album from?
Oh, yeah. What, Stop and Smell the Roses?
Yeah, I'm sure they were going to do something.
Right. Yeah, they were going to do something. And, of course, he would have worked with Paul, I'm sure. I don't think that's in doubt, really. I think they both had it in their contracts when John signed with Geffen for Double Fantasy and when Paul signed with Columbia at the time, they both had clauses that they could leave and work together as the Lennon and McCartney team for the Beatles, and that would be for Capitol, or EMI. So that would be part of their contracts. So although it wasn't set in stone, I mean, it's just inevitable that they would have worked together because they had to get that Long and Winding Road movie done. That had always been simmering in the background. So the anthology would have happened one way or another. Yeah. But outside of Paul and Ringo and George, I don't know who. I mean, I want to say Elvis Costello, but I feel like they're too similar, and that probably would have ended very badly because I know Lennon quoted him in that Playboy interview from 1980. He was actually quoting Nick Lowe, but he thought Elvis Costello wrote, "What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding?" So he was certainly aware of Elvis Costello, and I know he also liked Billy Joel, so it's possible that he would have collaborated with Billy Joel or jumped on stage or something.
I was thinking about this today. You know the audio diary, September 5th, 79?
Yes.
He says like the mighty Dylan, the mighty McCartney, mighty Jagger. So I feel like maybe Dylan and Jagger, it was too close. And when I did the Lennon-Dylan show with Ben Burrell, by the way, has just done a great series on Blonde on Blonde for his podcast, Bob Dylan album by album. Big recommendation. Anyway, and I think Ben and I actually said that John Lennon and Bob Dylan perhaps decided they were didn't decide, but realized they were too similar. So it's almost like seeing a mirror of yourself and in a sort of uncomfortable way. So, but I think Bowie and Elton, they seem to be totally positive collaborations in the 70s. So I could see that. Yeah,
although I did hear a story that Bowie got on Lennon's nerves after a while. But maybe everybody got on Lennon's nerves after a while.
Yeah. Have you seen the famous interview with Bowie on Dick Cavett when he's got that walking stick, that cane?
Oh, yes.
And he's just like shaking. He's just like, he does look like a ghost. It's unbelievable. I don't know. That might have happened. And then John and George, I don't know. It's so difficult to know. Again, there's all these weird subtext with them that like John said he felt George thought that maybe he was like a daddy who'd left home or an older brother or something. And then there was all that thing about I, me, mine. And I haven't read I, me, mine, but apparently, he kind of just came out with that there wasn't much on anyone in that. And I did leaf through it. It seems to be mostly lyrics, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what would have happened, I believe, with George is that John, after a year or two, would have rung him up and said, I'm working on a song. Come on down to the studio. And I think George would have filled his usual role. I think too much is made of those momentary arguments and disagreements. I think at the end of the day, yeah, it was, oh, shut up, just have a beer or smoke a joint or something, come to the studio. And that would have been the end of it. That would have been it. And for John to think that he wasn't mentioned once in I Me Mine, which is not true. He's actually mentioned more than Paul in the book.
Right.
I'm sure that, 2 months later or 3 more, a year later, John would not have even remembered making that comment. And would have been like, what? I don't remember saying that. So, yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks, Chris, for both of those questions. All right. Next one. Okay. Here we go.
Hello, Anthony. This is Luke Thompson from England, currently living in France. John Lennon once said famously, I'm an artist. If you give me a tuba, I'll get something out of it. So my question is, if someone had given him a tuba, what kind of thing do you think he would have produced with it? And would it have been any good as art?
All right. I was just on Luke's show, actually. Plug. He's got a great show that combines English teaching with various topics of interest. You had a good answer because we were chatting about this, weren't we? What was your answer about this?
Well, I had said that I don't think anything very musical would have come out of it. He doesn't strike me as that kind of musician like Paul or Stevie Wonder or Prince, where you just give him anything. Or Brian Jones even was rumored to be like that, right? Where you give him any instrument and a couple of hours, he can get something out of it. I would see John taking that tuba and doing like the great Dadaists and putting Arm Mutt or something and putting it on exhibition or stomping on it or, having it become some sort of art installation rather than doing anything musical with it. Because I could see him, looking at it, attempting it and going, well, I can't sound like Gene Vincent. And, that'd be the end of his dabblings with the tuba.
Yeah. I think given time, if it was lying around the studio, he probably would come out with something, but I don't think he would come out with it spontaneously. I think, like you said, Paul, Prince. I have a student who's a massive Prince fan. So he educates me about Prince continuously. And he was supposed to have been able to play, 20 instruments or something. So probably wouldn't have sounded that good, Luke, to be honest. All right. This is 2 questions in one. Here we go.
Hello, Anthony. My name's Gary Judd. I'm a postman from Nottingham, or at least that's my job. I'd just like to say I'm a massive fan of Glass Onion. It's my favourite Beatles podcast out there, and always looking forward to new episodes. And the same can be said for your other podcasts, Life and Life Only. My question today for you is, what is your opinion of John Lennon as a musician, and specifically as a guitarist, as I know you're a guitarist yourself? So what would be your favourite example of John Lennon's guitar playing on an album or a live recording? That could be intro, riff, rhythm playing, whatever you like. Another quick question, if you get a chance, is just who would you consider to be the fifth Beatle, the most important member of the Beatles' entourage or their inner circle, and who had the most influence on the Beatles? Because as we all know, they probably are better than the sum of their parts. Certainly I think so. Anyway, okay, mate, that's as brief as I can keep it. All the best. Speak to you soon. Thank you.
Oh, these people are lovely, eh?
Yeah.
It's so nice.
That's a great 2-part question there.
Yeah. Okay, let's do the second one first before I bust out the banjo. Go on, Ghosty. Who's the fifth Beatle?
For me, it's George Martin.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's always about the records, and he's contributed the most of anybody on those records. So for me, it's George Martin in terms of arrangement, just without question. I can understand the people that are Brian Epstein acolytes, because without whom we would have no records. I can understand the best people, without whom they wouldn't have been what they were in Hamburg and then took off in the cabin, and Brian wouldn't have seen them. They would have been introduced to George Martin. But for me, I guess it's George Martin.
Yeah, Stu Sutcliffe as well.
Oh, yes, Stu.
I've got a few contenders, actually. I sort of divided this out a little bit. I think Epi has got to be there. I guess you saw the arena on Brian Epstein sort of late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Epstein. Oh, God, we're here again. The manager's name is Mr. Brian Epstein. Brian Epstein? Yeah, sorry. No, did you see the Arena, the two-parter?
I think so, yeah.
It's really good. There's a really poignant bit where Simon Napier Bell, who's he managing? I can't even remember. Anyway, he was part of the gay scene in London. And he said, people talk about Brian Epstein being gay, fancying John Lennon, but it was much more that he wanted to belong to a gang, like the coolest gang in the world, which was the Beatles probably were for a while. So I'm going to say him. And personally, they always said Neil Aspinall. I think not in the beginning, but long term, he became director of Apple or president, whatever he was.
Mal Evans could be in there too, I suppose.
Sure. Yeah. And then professionally, George Martin, 100%. Again, this is one of those questions that keeps podcasts going for the next 100 years. There's stuff you're never going to solve.
Who are the 13 Beatles?
Yeah, well, there's Bernard Purdie as well. Bit of foreshadowing there.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah,
Is he your surprise call?
No, it's Quincy Jones. The question is always about George Martin. How much did he contribute? And we know up to a point, but then you get those little bit snatches of interview where they're saying, "Oh, he's taking too much credit." And I'm sort of disregarding the Rolling Stone 1970 interview in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah,
he kind of went back on it 4 years later, but I don't disregard all of it. I think there's a lot of quite compelling stuff in there. Anyway, right. Have you got any opinions about John Lennon as a guitarist?
With the exception of when I hear the finger picking stuff like in Julia or something like that, or in the trio of guitar solos in a row at the end with Abbey Road, I tend not to pay much attention to his rhythm guitar playing. It seems to get lost in the soup for me, and I'm more paying attention to either the lead or the bass. So I can't really quantify what's great about it, it's like the old saying, I don't know what it is, but I know what I like, So I can't really say this is better or greater. I'm talking about John and Christianity, but it's not my area of expertise. It's good what I hear, but you can speak more to this, I'm sure.
Well, just to talk about the end, if you actually look at the tab for that, what he's playing, it's just like the simplest thing in the world. But you can't argue with that tone, that gut bucket tone. So I think a lot of it was that. Right, I do have my guitar, and I get lots of messages saying they like these guitar things I do. And I've run out of guitar lessons because I've only got like 5 tricks. But yeah, it's very weird. Like when you listen to the records, you can hardly ever hear anything he's doing. Like when he's on acoustic, Beatles for Sale, obviously, as you said, the finger picking, Norwegian Wood and all that. You can hear him, but it's a bizarre thing in those early hits. It's like he's not there. It just kind of gets lost in this soup, as you said. But if you listen to the Star Club tapes, which I think, people are talking about the future, someone will definitely clean those up. And they're getting cleaned up by fans, and people are doing amateur things. But you can hear all the way sort of... That's what he's doing on most of the songs. And it's not flashy by any means, but it is distinctive. And I'll just give a few examples. I want to hold your hand to the beginning. That's John Lennon, that bit.
Right.
Obviously, George is doing the twangy bits. So it's just very solid. It's never flashy, but anyone will tell you that guitar doesn't need to be flashy. I would say the absolute opposite end of the coin from John Lennon is someone like Joe Satriani, who has got technical ability, or Steve Vai. He's got technical ability that is just almost unfathomable. Or it's fathomable if you think that they do like 8-hour guitar scale workouts. Yeah, they're very, very clinical about it. But there's some little touches. All My Loving, he does the main guitar bit on that.
Right.
I can't even play it. I'm going to play it in slow motion, basically. So it's triplets, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's you're essentially playing 12 notes per bar, very fast. And he's not even playing the normal guitar chord positions. He's playing all these, John Lennon often played all these weird inversions, which made it even more distinctive. But what's amazing is that was the first song they played on the Ed Sullivan Show, February 64.
Right.
That's the first time anyone's seen them. And he's playing this like fiendishly difficult. And of course, that's why you don't hear him sing on the verses of All My Loving, because it's very, very difficult to do that. So he always did distinctive things. And there's another thing, when I saw her standing there, a lot of my listeners are actually guitarists. The main chord is E7. So if you play it as a C7 moved up, so it's all.
Normally you go to the A on the 5th fret, but he brings the same shape up to the 10th.
You need to mute a couple of strings. It's a bit fiddly, but I'm sure there's a video where he does that. I think it's almost like the Beatles ethos to always do things in a different way or try and make it distinctive. I'm Happy Just to Dance With You. Quite an underrated song. I really like that song, actually. And you could play it like a... But what he does is...
Before this dance is through, I think of what you do.
He's creating something distinctive that really stands out. And then if you listen to any live versions, if you can't do that or watch them, you never see John playing the solo, because all the solos are just horrendous. He always makes a total mess of that live. But on the record, you can't do that. Great. He plays this sort of chordal solo. It's like a mixture of chords and individual notes. And then on Long Tall Sally, did you know that he did the first solo on that?
Oh, does he?
Yeah, if you listen back to that, that sounds really good. And I think he kind of managed to do that live as well. And then Yer Blues, I love this example of John Lennon's kind of minimalism / laziness. When you get to the solo, he just goes... The other guitars go... On the rock and roll circus, they go... And then when the chord changes to A, he just carries on going. But someone made a point, Clapton's solo on Rock and Roll Circus is like obviously technically brilliant. But John Lennon, for some reason, you just remember that. And it's so lazy and it's so minimalist, but it's great in another way. And by the way, I'm going to plug some other people. Darren Murphy, you must have heard him on When They Was Fab.
Sure, of course.
I mean, brilliant. Darren Murphy did an episode on John Lennon as a guitarist. There's a guy called Mike Pachelli. I think Robert's had him on his show. He does videos. And then there's a brilliant channel I discovered called Ably House, ABLY. And they reproduce the songs perfectly live without the vocals. So you get this sort of instrumental versions. Wow. Yeah. Just a couple of other things. Norwegian Wood is obviously really good.
That sort of two-string thing, which kind of came indirectly from Chuck Berry, although this is very, very far from Chuck Berry.
But interesting, You've Got to Hide the Love Away. When I first learned this on the guitar, I had a very simple book, and it just said it was like...
G, C, G.
And then I discovered that, again, this is for the guitarist, if you put your fingers on third and pinky on the third fret of the top two strings,
It's more like... It's got that sustaining those two notes.
and a few years later you get from that to...
And then 20 years after that you get...
Again, I don't know if John Lennon originated that. Maybe someone had done it before him.
I was just going to say, what's funny is that, I mean, a lot of these examples show the Beatles as composers moving away from conventional rhythm and blues type chord changes and things. And I hear a lot of 50s pop and like you mentioned, those triplets and All My Loving, there's something similar in a Peggy Lee song. And I know that that is also a huge part of their musical background is that pre-rock and roll stuff. And I think that, pre-rock and roll, like music was a huge part of their background. So they're drawing from all of these things and, putting it all together. I don't even know if it was consciously in a sense like, oh, let's be clever and do this. I think it was more like, oh, remember that thing on that record I used to love? And why don't we put something like that on there without even thinking, hey, this is kind of revolutionary. I keep thinking about McCartney's quote in Anthology where they talk about going to that minor and From Me to You and how it was, it sort of harkened back to another era or another song. And I hear a lot of that. And I think about also She Loves You at the very end, where they came up with, yeah. And then George Martin was like, but that's on a bunch of Andrews Sisters records. That's corny. And they were like, well, it's not to us. So I think a lot of that was going on. I think part of their gift was lifting, I hate to say this because it sounds like I'm going to be disparaging blues and country music, but lifting it out of that purist idea of blues and country music and incorporating pop and I don't know what other word I could use for it, but some elements of jazz, things you hear in chord changes that were maybe common in show tunes and things like that. It's no secret that they were doing Till There Was You or Red Sails in the Sunset and things like that, that's in their repertoire. Anyway, I don't know if that really has anything to do with the guitar playing per se, but that was my little rant here.
We have the Travis picking, as it's called, that Donovan taught him in India. So I suppose the most famous examples, so you got Julia. And of course he would use that on many, many songs. And another famous one, when Mia Farrow's sister was meditating too much. And that utilizes another trick of sustaining the chord D and then moving the bass down. So obviously he mostly used that on his own songs. Look at Me, of course, from Plastic Ono. But he did use it on Ringo's song Octopus's Garden. So.
And then the last example I was just going to give was I Found Out. So obviously if you've heard some of the Plastic Ono Band, some of that's great guitar playing and very, very simple, but Ringo's drumming is very, very simple and it's just massively effective. So, and I Find Out it's actually just two chords. So.
Now that I showed you what I can do, don't take nobody's word. What should you do? And then the chorus. I found out. So it's got this jerky style with the damp strings. That's just A minor and G.
All right, Gary, thanks for those two questions. Let's get on to the next one.
Hello, this is Owen Ling calling from Cork in Ireland. My question is, do you think John Lennon's heart was there with the Republican movement, or was it just a fad? He wrote two blinding tracks on the Sometime in New York City, but some accused him of fad-hopping.
Okay, so that was obviously Owen Ling, who's been on the show, good friend of mine. I honestly don't know a great deal about this. I did find a video, did some research, and I'll tell you what they said in the video, and then maybe you can give us your take. They said that John Lennon didn't really mention his Irishness, but both him and Paul were very proud of it. He didn't really mention it until obviously Bloody Sunday, which is the And there's lots of Bloody Sundays, by the way, on Wikipedia. Different events are called Bloody Sunday, but the Irish one was 30th of January 72. 26 civilians killed by the British Army, and they were protesting internment without trial. Some interesting stuff. Apparently, John Lennon went to a march on Oxford Street with a sign saying Red Mole for the IRA. So you probably know Red Mole was this activist newspaper that he did an interview for. He also said, this is classic Lennon sort of contradiction. He said he was for the IRA, but for non-violence. Now, I don't know. The thing I'm going to get to in a minute, actually, after I've thrown to you, is how bloody difficult politics is even to talk about, because these are such thorny issues. And all I was going to say was that I grew up in England. In those days, I didn't really know about propaganda, and I didn't have the same strong feeling I have now that the media is kind of a propaganda machine. All we ever heard about the IRA is, bombs and violence. And I guess, I don't know, I feel really uncomfortable talking about any of this, especially to an Irish guy. Oh, you know what I mean? All I was going to say was that, I'm sure there's more to it than that. I mean, it was a movement. It's kind of like, I don't know, if you think of the Viet Cong, if you think about the way that the communists are portrayed in the sort of mainstream version of Vietnam, they're these sort of mindless killers, that don't have a heart at all.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Have you got any thoughts, or do you know anything about this, Ghosty?
Not really. It was obviously not as big of a news story here in the U.S. as it was overseas. I mean, I have a little bit of, a little bit of awareness of it. I can say that I think in terms of Lennon, was he jumping on a bandwagon or was his heart really in it? Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, I think you can have your heart in something and be jumping on a bandwagon or a trend at the same time. And I think it's quite possible also to walk away from it. In that Skywriting by Word of Mouth book, which is sort of like the lost Lennon book that no one ever talks about because it was published posthumously, he says in that book, the worst thing that Yoko and I ever did was get involved with Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman and their kind, talking about how I think he chalks up their political movement as being macho, and he and Yoko, their bed-ins, that was the way to go, and it was a mistake. But I also believe that when he was working with them, I think he was 100% sincere. I don't think it was done in a kind of a crass way of, well, this is popular and this is going to get me in the newspaper. Yeah. I don't think John had any trouble getting in the newspaper. So I do think he was sincere, but I think, boy, he was a guy who went through phases. You just go through phases of, it's there in the background, but your focus is on something else. I believe he had these convictions. It's just not where his head was at that moment.
I would say he was more flaky than fad-hopping. Dan Richter's been on the show a couple of times, and he said John Lennon was just fizzing with ideas almost, every waking moment, and he couldn't get them down on paper quick enough. I think he was sincere. I have another theory, and this sounds totally like coffee table psychology. I listened to a psychology podcast by a professional therapist. So he said this: you and I are going to be doing a podcast about Marlon Brando very soon. Marlon Brando gets mentioned a lot in Glass Onion. It's not for Glass Onion listeners, from one of my other podcasts. And this therapist did a long show on Marlon Brando, and he was talking about how wounded children or very traumatized children, and I think Lennon and Brando were definitely this, there's often something in them where they want to change the world. They spend their whole life trying to compensate. And you know loads about Marlon Brando, so you would agree with me. Brando spent his whole life trying to sort of sort through or work out his issues. He went to therapists for years. There's a famous quote of Marlon Brando: I tried fucking, I tried food, I tried meditation, I tried drugs, etc. Right. And I think John Lennon was very like that. So I think a lot of it, he was doing it for himself. I think he was genuinely proud of the Irish connection. But my feeling about politics is that if you're someone like, Tariq Ali, or what was the other guy, Robin Blackburn, I think, the two Red Mole guys, I think to be an activist, a political activist, you've kind of got to be doing it almost full time. I mean, they probably need some other income, of course, but I've tried to get my head around politics, but I realize that the amount of time I spend on it is not enough to fully understand these issues, especially these very, very contentious historical issues. So I'm going to say that he was sincere, The stuff I love about John Lennon, if you ever hear him talking about drugs in 69, and there's a famous Cavett clip where he says, we never think about why people take drugs.
Right.
We're always trying to punish them. And there's obviously this whole, there was a difference in Britain and America. And I'm going a bit off topic, but Britain saw addicts as patients and America decided to criminalize them. And there's a whole history of that. But I like John Lennon on those topics because I feel like he really knows what he's talking about. And he understood the media. He's very good on advertising, propaganda. I just don't know if he had the patience and the dedication to spend enough time on these issues.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't think he did either, but he certainly would fly the flag and be happily become the poster boy for those issues, but maybe without fully investing in them.
Yeah, and I think there was a bit of, someone said about John Lennon, again, this could apply to lots of people. These people are a weird mixture of streetwise and quite childlike naive.
Right.
They kind of have those two things. They experience loads of life, but there's a kind of a quite naive child in there somewhere, which I think makes them quite charming in a way. But I don't know if it was you and I were talking about this. Muhammad Ali had the same thing. His entourage was full of street people, and Muhammad Ali was not a real street person. I mean, he didn't grow up rich by any means, but he didn't grow up on the street. And I think John Lennon was surrounded by people who grew up on the street and knew how to work this, and they probably were hustling him. I don't honestly know. But, let's talk about the two songs that Owen mentioned. I just want to talk about Sunday Bloody Sunday because I actually really like this. And I like Sometime in New York City quite a bit, a lot more than lots of people. It might be context because I told this story once on the podcast that the first time I heard it was actually in New York. I'd heard a couple of songs and I bought it and we were staying at a person's flat who had a really good stereo system. And they said, oh, what's that? And I just bought this CD and we put it on and sort of partied the night away. I found it very danceable. Not that I'm a very good dancer, but I saw it on that level. I didn't really analyze the lyrics. But Sunday Bloody Sunday's got that marching sense, and it's got some quite specific lyrics. I mean, I think he mentions internment, whereas Luck of the Irish, and I'm not saying it's a bad song, and Owen, as he said, he likes it. For me, it just didn't quite work, and they got lyrics about genocide, which is not really, as far as I know, it wasn't genocide, and obviously he was going for something ironic, having the jaunty thing, and I like the luck of I like the luck of the Irish, the ironic thing. If you had the luck of the Irish, you'd wish you were English. But what do you think about those two songs?
Of the two, I prefer Luck of the Irish for only the simple reason that it's much catchier. It's a much more appealing piece of music. I'm just responding to it on that gut level. Sunday Bloody Sunday, honestly, I haven't heard or listened to that album in a long, long time. Luck of the Irish, only because they performed it, right? Didn't they perform it on Mike Douglas?
Yeah, David Frost as well.
Right.
He seemed to want to bust the guitar out and play that in lots of places.
Yeah, and it stands out more. For some reason, it just has a higher profile, I guess, and it just stuck with me more. It's certainly the more commercial of the two, but like you said, it mentions genocide. There's just something off about it. Like it's sort of half-baked, but his heart was in the right place.
Sure. Yeah, I think he was sincere to answer that sort of strand of the question. Yeah, for sure. But, he's involved with, there's a famous case of Han Ratty. I don't know if you ever heard of
Yes.
him. And Michael X was a sort of, he wasn't British, was he? West Indian version of Malcolm X. Anyway, I stand by what I said just a bit earlier about politics, is that if you really want to be a political activist, I think you've got to be doing it almost full time, right? I mean, these issues, they take hours and weeks and months to research properly,
Right, yeah. Dropping an album's not really going to be the equivalent of devoting your life to it. So.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Sunday Bloody Sunday's less commercial, but I think it's a classic album track. And I think it's quite a good political song. I mean, U2 obviously did a good song with the same name.
Sure.
We better move on, shall we?
Yes.
All right, thanks for that, Owen. And you mentioned skywriting word of mouth. Owen will be on the show very soon to do the 3 Lennon books.
Oh, good.
Yeah, which I'm really looking forward to because be worried about repeating myself, but we haven't really covered those books.
I'm glad about that because a large part of Lennon's appeal to me personally is in those books.
Right.
I find that to be something that's overlooked, so I'm glad you're devoting a podcast to that.
Although it's not totally unique, it took a bit of, I guess, Joyce Finnegan's work, Stanley Unwin.
Yes.
But it's definitely got the Lennon stamp on it, and I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah, we're going to do a serious deep dive.
When I was a teen, I'll just end this. When I was, maybe not a teenager, but whenever I was really getting heavily into the Beatles, like when I was about 12 or so, I actually wrote my own knockoff version of In His Own Right. It's funny because I was never inspired to pick up a guitar, but I was inspired to put together my own book of doodles and poems and mangled English. And then we had the graphic arts class in school. And so I printed up versions of this and tried to get people interested, but nobody was. It did have a great cartoon of a homeless guy sticking out his cup, like a beggar's cup. Yeah. And then a very wealthy guy peeing in it. And that is probably the only lasting thing that I would say, yeah, that's still pretty good, that cartoon.
That's good social commentary, yeah.
Yeah, for 12. I'm proud of that. I meant it at the time.
Yeah, you're fully committed.
Right.
I actually did the same thing. I wrote a story. It was something about strummeling guitars. And one bit I was happy with. You know Jerry Halliwell, who was Ginger Spice? My friend, who I used to play music with, was a window cleaner. His dad had a window cleaning business. And he cleaned the windows of Jerry Halliwell's house. So I wrote something about cleaning Jenny Happywell's windpipes or something.
Exactly.
Which wasn't bad, yeah. It's very John Lennon. Anyway, much as I'd love to keep talking about that, we've still got about 20 questions left. What was that about, a three-parter? Anyway, you ready for the next one?
Yes, I'm ready.
I think this is two questions in one. Here we go.
Okay, hi, Anthony. Great podcast. My name's Gavin. I'm from Manchester and I live in China. Thanks for letting me ask a question on here. I've got two questions, actually. How much musical theory did the Beatles know and how would that work into the songs? For example, so I've listened to loads of Beatles bootlegs and they mention verse, chorus and middle eight, and they'll say which chords things are, but they never go into things like scales or timings so much. Would they communicate to each other in terms of musical theory, or were they just, that sounds good, keep that in, and they just had a really strong instinct for music? And okay, second question. Did the Beatles have a secret code that they would use in interviews to describe them smoking weed? I say this because when I watched the anthology when I was a kid, I noticed that in lots of interviews, Paul and George especially would mention things like, oh, and we couldn't finish this song off, so we went and had a cup of tea and everything was okay. This cup of tea metaphor comes into play in a lot of the Beatles interviews, and I'm just wondering whether you agree with me that it was used as a little bit of a code.
All right. Shall I take the theory one and you can take the weed one?
Sure.
I mean, obviously, we know that if you showed the musical notation to Yesterday to Paul McCartney and it didn't have chord symbols on it, he wouldn't recognize it, and he's fully admitted that. They didn't know theory in terms of reading notes, but as a musician, you pick up tricks. So one of the tricks you learn, I don't know if you know, do you know what the doo-wop sequence is? It's the four chords of Stand By Me.
Right.
I think I did it on the show, and you can play Please Mr. Postman, You Really Got a Hold on Me, and 100 other of those era songs. Obviously 12 Bar Blues is similar. You can play a million songs. So I think Lennon and McCartney had a very good sense of learning tricks and absorbing them. And John Lennon has kind of admitted that a lot of the early sort of hack songs, where they were told to write a song, he would kind of start playing a song that he knew and then kind of start evolving it. And I've actually done this myself. One songwriting technique, which some people would be quite aghast at, and I've only ever done this probably once or twice, is to actually play a song that you know and then start changing it. And eventually you change it enough so it becomes yours. And we know, if you saw John Lennon's Jukebox, really good episode of the South Bank show, I don't remember it very well, but I saw a review that said, were the Beatles just kind of knocking off R&B songs? And, I think you and I have talked about this before. That's not really how songwriting works. You could drill into almost any song and see where it came from. So right. I think it's a mixture of picking up a little bit of theory. Obviously, they knew the names of chords. They knew diminished chords, augmented chords. It's that, absorbing tricks and taking what's gone before. So that's my answer to that. Gavin, by the way, is the director of the upcoming documentary Finding Claudio, which you will have surely heard of. The guy who was outside Tittenhurst that time. which I've been
That's right.
I've been plugging on the show, so I'm looking forward to that. Have you got anything to say about the theory question?
Well, I mean, I've heard the bootlegs too, and I've never really heard them talk beyond that. I think that was all instinctual. I don't think, I guess that would lead into the secret language in its own way. It's possible that they used having a cup of tea as a metaphor for going to smoke pot. Certainly the Ruddles did, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've had tea,
but
lots of tea.
I know that there are stories of people who visited Studio 2, and the Beatles are literally stopping and having a tea break. So, I mean, it's possible to take it very literally, too. I don't know. At what point would they have been discussing it? I mean, after 66 or 67, wouldn't they have just said, we smoked a joint and then we went back to writing the song? Would they have been hiding it by 67?
I think one of the things they used to say was, let's go and have a laugh. That was one of their codes. I'm sure you've heard the Think for Yourself session. You know, we've got 19 minutes of it. And it's absolutely amazing to have that. When you think that they started recording Rubber Soul in October, they hadn't finished the songs, and they're just like larking about. I mean, I'm sure they were serious when they needed to be. But actually during that, I listened to that quite carefully on headphones a while ago. And you actually hear John Lennon go off to the toilet. And it's pretty clear that he's gone to have a laugh. And he comes back. You know, they're all in that kind of hazy mood. And so, yeah, to answer Gavin's question, I'd say tea and biscuits. That was the Ruttles. And, having a laugh. Another funny story. The story were always told us that they went to the canteen and that George Martin kind of knew but didn't know at the same time kind of thing. But Pete Shotton in his book, I do remember this story, in 67 when they were making Pepper, Pete Shotton was in the studio with them and he had a cigarette in his hand and someone passed him a joint. And that was the exact moment when he was introduced to George Martin for the first time. And George Martin looked over and he had a cigarette in both hands.
That's right. I remember that story. Yeah.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, I really want to read that book again. They go behind the screens. That's another story. They get Mal to roll them up. I don't feel like they would have been stoned too often when they were recording. I feel like I think their sense of quality control would have, maybe only in 67, because Hunter Davis tells these amazing stories. I mean, I don't know when the last time you read his book. I mean, I haven't read the whole book probably since the first time I read it, but his accounts of the Pepper sessions are incredible because he'll say, like, John goes to Paul's house, they play the same thing for 4 hours and then decide it's not working. And people come to Paul's house and then they smoke a joint and they just have this incredibly leisurely attitude, which I just absolutely love. It's so funny to think of it. Shall we move on?
Yes.
All right, thanks for that, Gavin. All right, next question. We're going to Europe this time. Continental Europe. Here we go.
Hello, my name is Koen de Vos. I live in Ghent, is a city in Belgium. I'm a long-time listener of your podcast. I love the episodes on 1966 and also the one with Ken McNabb. I even bought his book On the End of the Beatles after that interview. Also, the interview with Robert Rosen I thought was really cool. I find the last period of Lennon's life really intriguing because there's been so much mystery about it, and hearing from people who were there at the time is really amazing. Now for my question. There's an aspect of John Lennon which I never or rarely hear being talked or written about, and it's the change in his voice. I'm a big fan of his early Beatle voice up until around 1966. From Sgt. Pepper on, it seems like it's getting a little thinner. And most definitely from the White Album in 68 on, the voice is thinner and he seems to be singing in a higher range maybe. Compare the song Money from the early Beatles, like around 1964, to John Lennon's version he sang in Canada in 1969. Also from that same Canada concert, Dizzy Miss Lizzy, compared to the 1965 version. It's a huge difference. I prefer the early versions because there his early voice is like full, more power. And in 1969 he sings them with a lot thinner voice. So for me there are like two John Lennon voices. The early Beatle voice and then the John Lennon solo voice starting with the White Album tracks. So I'm wondering, am I the only one hearing that, or do you hear that as well? And what could the reason for this change be? One thing I think of is the use of LSD and other drugs from 1965-66 on, but then again, Paul was using drugs as well, and his voice always more or less stayed the same. So I'm interested in yours or other experts' opinions on this. So that was my question. Good luck with the podcast, and I hope you make lots more of them. Keep up the good work. I know I will keep on listening. Greetings from Ghent in Belgium. Take care and goodbye.
Wow, what a lovely message. I think his name was Koen from Belgium, yeah. Thank you very much for that. It's a lovely message and a good question. You want to take that one first, Ghosty?
Yeah, I have had this conversation with a friend of mine. We used to talk about what happened to John Lennon's voice. There is a significant difference, as he points out. And the only thing that I can ascribe it to is maybe because he was no longer playing live, that he had been gigging constantly, right? And then, of course, they're touring in between recording. And the minute that stops is when Lennon's voice changes. So maybe that's got something to do with it, but I hear it too. There's a completely different late period John Lennon voice compared to the early rock and roll voice. I mean, he gets a little close to it on What You Got on the Walls and Bridges album, but yeah, it's a thinner voice. You've talked about it before, and it bears repeating. For someone to change so much and so dramatically in such a short period of time, why is there not a Lennon was replaced rumor?
Yeah.
Because Paul's the least likely, and John is the one where it's like an entirely different person. I know that there's the Lennon Prophecy book by John Niesgood, if people want to go down that route. Yeah. But I agree. I can only just assume it has to do with not touring. I mean, I like both voices. It's clearly John, but even his speaking voice changed. We had talked about that once he moved to New York, you know, instead of saying, well, I bought the record, then it became, I bought the record. I went and bought the record. Like he starts speaking in this higher pitch and he sounds a little more agitated. I don't know if it's cocaine or, I mean, that's just the thought, but, you know, he's just got this higher pitch. Your thoughts?
Very interesting, yeah. I was on a podcast called Under the Covers, which is a really good one. Really nice fellow called John runs that one. We were talking about, the scream on Yer Blues and the scream on Twist and Shout is a completely different scream.
Yeah.
And I think the phrase that I used at the time that came to me was, Yer Blues is more the scream of experience. You know, because if you think about what's happened in those 5 years, I mean, we've talked on the show before about Beatle years, 5 years in the Beatles' life is like 25 years in anyone else's.
Right.
And I think Twist and Shout, he describes himself as sort of a frantic guy doing his best or something like that. What does thinner mean exactly? Can you give me an example where his voice is, could you give me 2 songs so I can understand that?
Well, I'm thinking more in terms of his speaking voice. Now, I know that the Beatles played up their accents initially.
I think him in particular, I think. Sorry to interrupt. Him in particular,
Yeah, so it's kind of really hard. It's almost unfair to compare because one is a bit of some posturing going on there. But even something like All I've Got to Do, finding a song that's not double tracked in that early period's tough because that's obviously going to make things sound a little fuller. But All I've Got to Do compared to Cry Baby Cry, I mean, it just has rather a thinner sound to it. It's just there's not almost like he lost weight, which he did. Maybe that's got something to do with it too. I mean, there are all these physiological issues and, eventually he became almost emaciated after a while.
Oh, controversial there.
Yeah.
We've never covered that period on the show. Maybe I should start.
You should devote an episode to that.
Apparently there's a couple of books, some Coleman and Goldman and someone else. I don't know. Anyway, get back to the question. I'm sorry. If you think of 68, there's a lot of childlike stuff going on. Dear Prudence, he's singing about daisy chains and stuff. And Cry Baby Cry is kind of like a nursery rhyme, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
His voice sounds more fragile. It does sound a bit fragile in the early days. I feel like he had more energy. I think he'd burned a lot of his energy out. I mean, there's some people have said that, the real John Lennon or the full power John Lennon died around 66. He was so burned out that perhaps he never got that back,
Also, it's maybe dynamics come into play because if you think of a song like If I Fell, I think later on, when you hear that softness in Oh My Love, and If I Fell is like, if I fell in love with you, he's almost shouting. There really isn't much dynamic going on there, as wonderful as that song is. So maybe that's got something to do with it too. Maybe he actually developed technique. and, you know, was kind of done with that period of being shouty.
Yeah, and I don't know, thinking about drugs, obviously cigarettes, that's going to change your voice.
Oh, yeah.
As Kuhn said, I think Paul smoked a fair amount of ciggies. They probably all smoked about the same, you know, some people say 40, 60 a day. That's going to change it. I don't know if LSD changes your voice. Cocaine definitely gives you that kind of hoarse voice.
Right.
You can hear that, you know, a lot in the 70s. You know, there's lots of 70s sessions and stuff. Not necessarily just him, but lots of people. Again, this therapist that I listened to was saying as well that the disguise element of John Lennon, making himself look different. I mean, even Goldman talked about this. It's like having lots of different faces, you know, like Goldman posited this theory that, you know, John Lennon had not multiple personality disorder, but he had these, you know, John Lennon himself, remember he said, you know, when he was a kid, he used to look in the mirror and his face would change. And of course, when I was a kid, I tried everything John Lennon said. So I tried looking in the mirror and my face did change a little bit as well. But the concealment of identity and perhaps the voice, you know, it's this thing of forever changing personas. And I think that may be sort of an insecurity thing. And again, that's a professional therapist did say something along those lines. To do with Toronto, I think he was in a real mess. You know, I saw Sweet Toronto when I was 14 and I didn't know anything about anything. And I knew John Lennon was in a mess then. You know, because he's barely singing them. I mean, they sound great now. Like, for some reason, the audio is really, really good. And the band sounds really loose and funky. But, you know, he's sort of saying, he's not even, like, finishing the lines. It's so low energy. You know, because I think he was pretty off his tits, to be honest, on that thing. So I think maybe Madison Square Garden 72, you know, sounds a bit coked up, to be honest. But he sounds fairly good there. But I think I wouldn't say it was more thin necessarily, but I think it's the voice of experience and the voice of, you know, however many cigarettes and Scotch and Cokes and LSD, you know?
Well, Goldman didn't call it the lives of John Lennon for no reason at all. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, thanks for the question there from Belgium.
All right, I have to run and use the restroom.
Okay.
So I'll be back. I'll
talk to the listeners in the meantime. So David is taking a break. It's just me and you, the listeners, for a couple of minutes. So thank you for your questions. Hope you're enjoying the show. I think when Ghosty and I get together, it's never going to be a short conversation. It's always going to be epic. I might leave this in, actually. Keep it organic. Podcast should be organic. This is my DJ hour. And next we have question 11. That comes from Diarmuid in Ireland. Oh, could just do with having a laugh. Cup of tea and some biscuits. Cup of tea and biscuits. Great. Great. Sounded like Ringo there. Great.
Okay, I have returned.
I might keep that in. I just rambled for a couple of minutes.
Sorry. I was also thinking if you were going to split it up into 2 episodes, there's your perfect break. You can just have to go, I have to go to the bathroom, and then you to have a toilet flush, and then...
Yeah, back in 2 weeks.
Right.
Okay, ready for the next one?
Hi Antonio, this is Anthony Seagreen in Liverpool, author of the novel Better Than the Beatles! ! My question is, if you could read one Beatles book, fiction or non-fiction, that is yet to be written, what would it be? Okay, thank you.
Can I go first?
Yes, by all means.
Personally speaking, I want to read the Glass Onion book because I want to write the fucking thing because I want to go forward to a time when I've written it. So, no, seriously, I'm going to cheat a bit and just mention a book that has been written. But have you read Paperback Writer?
Have there been a few books with that title? What's Paperback Writer? What's this one?
Yeah, I've got one that's 40 years of writing about the Beatles. I've read the one.
Oh, right.
No, it's not that one. It's, I can't remember his name anyway. I think it's a fantasy, an alternate universe where I think the Beatles still exist. But it's that reworking of it as if they weren't the Beatles, I think. But apparently it's really good. But I did come up with an answer to this. I would like someone to write a book where Julia Lennon and Stuart Sutcliffe survived, because it would have been fascinating to think of Julia Lennon. Because, you know, Aunt Mimi went to Australia and New Zealand. I don't know if that was reluctantly or not, but they had relatives, I think, New Zealand or Australia. But Julia would have clearly been a big supporter. So you can imagine her going on the tours and, you know, probably messing around for the camera.
Oh, of course.
And Stuart Sutcliffe, of course, would have surely designed some or all of their album covers. So
He would have had Klaus's job, yeah.
yeah, well, they were friends though, weren't they? I think.
Yeah.
They became friends. Well, they had something in common, obviously. But that's another story. What do you reckon? Any fantasy books?
Well, my answer will also be self-serving because I would love to. It's the book that I was supposed to begin, and it was going to take me to various locales. I had a big trip planned before the virus hit and wiped out my savings account. But I wanted to read a book about the rock and roll industry in Britain prior to the Beatles and how much the Beatles and Brian Epstein in particular, what they took from what had already been established and what they deviated from. And it's sort of touched on briefly in various Beatle books, obviously Tune In. It's a funny thing because the history of the Beatles being taken seriously, so much of the literature seems to come from America, and it has influenced, I think, how the Beatles story is told even in Britain. So I would like, and of course here I would be an American writing a book on the British industry. I mean, there are books out there. I know Spencer Lee has cranked out a couple, and I know that Pete Frame's Restless Generation deals with that, but they don't really bring the Beatles into it. And there's so many things, like the Beatles doing pantomime, for example, that other acts were doing. I know that they went to the same tailor that the Shadows did, to get similar suits. A lot of these things. And then how they deviated and how Brian Epstein differed from other pop managers like Larry Parnes. And again, these things are addressed, but I'd like to read a whole book about it. And that was part of my goal, and it still may come to pass.
Let's make a pact that we're both going to do our books. Let's make a pact right now.
First, folks.
Live on air. We're going to do it.
And we were genuine when we said it.
Yeah. Just like John. No, I am going to do it. I've got it on my schedule. It's going to take precedent. It's going to take precedent at some point. So, yeah, I kind of took that question. I was going down the fiction route. These alternate universe. I mean, it's just so tragic and terrible that we didn't get. I mean, obviously, Mary McCartney, Paul's mother as well. She could have been around.
Yeah.
It's tragic. I missed.
Wasn't there a book that did like what if stories regarding the Beatles?
The only one I know, there's a book about Stuart Sutcliffe that I think was renamed Backbeat because of the film. And in the last 2 pages, they posit an alternate universe. And Paul McCartney's a Merseyside DJ. John Lennon's a teacher at the art college. George becomes a mystic. Surprise, surprise. I don't know what Ringo does.
That's funny because I could see John and Paul's roles being really reversed. I could see Paul having the discipline to be a teacher and John being a DJ on Radio Merseyside or something.
Oh, maybe, yeah. Because he was a good DJ, actually. He did well.
Yeah, he did it in New York. Yeah. And also, there's a book called Glimpses by Louis Schreiner. Or is it Shiner? I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a book about a guy who he can time travel to periods in rock history and help bands finish their great lost unfinished albums. And so he helps Jimi Hendrix complete First Rays of the Morning Light or Morning Sun, whatever that album is.
Yeah.
The Doors' Celebration of the Lizard, and then the Beatles, the Get Back Project. There's also that book, if anybody out there is interested in such things.
This is not a book, but this is a TV sort of drama of half an hour called Snodgrass with Ian Hart.
Fantastic.
I just love Ian Hart as John Lennon.
Yeah.
It's only about half an hour, I think, and it's if John Lennon had left the Beatles in 62, Ian Hart, as I said, John Lennon at 50, a lodger in a flat and doing filing jobs.
Yep.
There's a great bit of the script. I love it when people write lines that the person didn't say, but you can imagine them. And he's doing a filing job, and he says, when women file their nails, do they file them under F for file or N for nails? So that was you could just imagine John Lennon saying that, even though he didn't say it. So it's very clever, but big recommendation.
That's a wonderful. Boy, so we should release a box set with all 3 of the Ian Hart. The Ian Hart is John Lennon collection.
Absolutely, yeah. I might try and get him on the show, actually. Just put an idea in my head.
That'd be wonderful.
He might do it, yeah. I feel like he might. I use my Liverpool connections, of which I've got a few now, including the person who gave that question, Tony. Help me, Tony. Yeah, thanks for that question anyway. All right. And we're on to the next one. I actually had one by text. One of my technophobic listeners who goes by Boy from Space on Twitter. He's been very supportive, so I don't mind that he didn't send
Hello, Space Boy. There's a David Bowie reference for the day.
Yeah, well, no, Boy from Space, when I saw his photo on Twitter, this won't mean much, I don't think, to anyone outside Britain, but people of a certain age will remember a show called Look and Read, which was teaching you to read, and it was like had songs about grammar, it was that kind of thing. But they used to have these really sinister stories, and they had one about a boy coming down from space. It's really creepy. Anyway, that's where that came from. This is a good question, yeah. If you could own one piece of Beatles or John Lennon memorabilia, what would it be? I'm going to let you go first because I've got my answer in my pocket.
Oh, what would I own?
Beatles or John Lennon?
Boy, that's tough. It would have to be something from the early formative years of the Beatles, which is always, for me, the most interesting period.
It's becoming the most interesting.
That's why Tune In is such a thrill.
Yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with Liverpool because I used to follow the football team when I was a kid. And then the first time I went to Liverpool, 1995, I went with my first love as well. I was like 19 years old, and you just have this magical weekend. First time I'd ever been to Liverpool. So it's got a special place in my heart.
Yeah, maybe a copy of the Daily Howl.
Oh, wow, yes. Well, of course, a lot of that would have been in his own right, wouldn't it? But not all of it, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, just like the actual, or the artwork that's on walls and bridges.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As a guitarist, perhaps this is predictable, but I'm going to go for John Lennon's first guitar, the one he was playing at St. Peter's Fete.
Yeah, you'd be a wealthy person overnight, yeah.
Yeah, well, it went for, God knows, I don't know what it went for, a couple of £100,000, I think, pounds at auction. The other one, I would like to own the block of hash that the police planted in George Harrison's boot, because apparently it was massive. And I have heard that hash, if you leave it for a long time, it gets stronger. So can you imagine?
If you get that, then I'll get Sergeant Pilcher's badge.
Yeah.
That's what
Just on that note, Paul McCartney's wedding day. I don't know if you've read Riding So High. We obviously reviewed it, Tom Hunyadi and I.
Right.
Do you know about that day? I mean, this is just amazing. Listen to this. Paul gets married. George gets busted. And, of course, Patty is home when he gets busted. George comes home to find the police playing Beatles records in his living room. You just couldn't make this shit up. And then not only that, they go to some party in the evening. Princess Margaret is there with Lord Snowdon. Were they together? I can't remember. Maybe they were just friends. And Patty Harrison's younger. There's so many Boyd sisters who are like all amazingly hot. Anyway, one of Patty's sisters, there's a joint going around and she offers it to Princess Margaret. Just an ordinary day in 1969.
Right. See, you couldn't fit that into one book, yeah.
That's what I mean, just one day. I mean, yeah, exactly. Right. You could write 100 pages on that. Anyway, great question. All right. Are you ready? This is the big one, mate. Are you ready for this?
Yep.
All right. Here we go.
Hey, Anthony, how you doing? It's Paul McCartney here. Great podcast. John was a great guy. You know, he was right-handed and I was left-handed, so it was like looking in a mirror. You're probably wondering how I wrote yesterday. I mean, I dreamed it. You know, I had a dream and then I woke up and it was there, you know, not the lyrics, but the music. And I went round to Al McCogan and a few other people and said, you know, do you know this melody? You know, could it be an original melody? Is it really mine? I'm from Liverpool, by the way, you know, working class. But I've got some houses in Sussex and St John's Wood, you know, right by Abbey Road Studios. You know, you've probably heard that rumour that I used to nip into the studio and re-record George's guitar and Ringo's drum parts. But that's definitely only partly true. Anyway, here's my question. Do you think the White Album should have been a single album? And if so, what songs would you have dropped? If you've seen the anthology, you probably know what my views are on it. But what do you and Ghosty think? Anyway, good luck, mate. All the best.
Go reaction.
Well, you mentioned earlier about being interviewed, but boy, to be interviewed by Paul McCartney, that's amazing that he's asking the questions and he still manages to bring in the Yesterday Story.
Yeah, it's clever. Yeah, that was falling apart badly in the middle, but I think I got the croak back towards the end, rescued it.
Okay.
I do like impressions. Well, you do impressions as well. You were doing Elvis last time.
Yes. In fact, my first professional voiceover job was on MTV's Celebrity Deathmatch, where I impersonated celebrities.
No way. Really?
For a number of years. Yeah.
How many of them did you do?
Oh, a bunch. I couldn't even tell you. I did Hugh Grant, and I did members of Kiss and NSYNC, whoever was popular at the time. Nicolas Cage. A bunch of them.
If anyone's seen The Trip with Rob Brydon and Steve Coogan, in the end they conclude that Brydon's impersonations are more entertaining and Coogan's are more accurate. So I go for entertainment. But, the essence of an impression is just to nail it. Just nail the essence like a James Stewart and It's a Wonderful Life. Oh, Murray. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Paul McCartney just got to say, great. And John was a great guy, Lots of that.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Steve Ricks is teaching everybody how to do the late period Paul McCartney, old man McCartney voice.
Oh, totally. My impressions are basically via Stevie Ricks.
Well, that's how you learn to do them. I mean, there are plenty of impressions that I learned to do from watching or listening to somebody else do it. And I go, oh, that's how you do William Shatner, and it's like, I've watched Star Trek my entire life, but then I see a comedian do it and I go, oh, yes, I got it. But in terms of the single disc White Album.
Oh, yes.
What would happen if we had been Capitol Records executives and had decided that in America, oh no, the White Album, you can't do that. We have to release two separate albums.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obvious what you would take off, but certainly I would agree with the real Paul McCartney. I would not want that to happen. You could have stretched it out to 3 if you included singles.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Not release a Yellow Submarine album and throw Hey Bulldog in there and All Together Now and throw Lady Madonna in the Inner Light. Yeah, I don't know what you would do. I mean, there's just so much top-notch material. You'd wind up having to release a second album anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this sort of alternate universe, it's a sort of tight single album with no kind of weird stuff on it. So obviously you're going to take off Wild Honey Pie. Why Don't We Do It in the Road? And I actually think Why Don't We Do It in the Road is great. It's experimental. It's exactly what John Lennon did with, I Want You, She's So Heavy, except his was 7 minutes. Because Why Don't We Do It in the Road is the same thing sung in like 4 different styles. So I think you could have, let's think, what if we were making a tight 14-song album? I mean, they pretty much pick themselves, wouldn't you say? So.
Well, they do, yeah. Back in the USSR, Dear
Prudence.
While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Happiness is a Warm Gun.
Right.
I'm So Tired. Blackbird.
Right. Wow, Blackbird, definitely.
There's a few on side 2. Like I probably would leave off. I still think they're good, but Piggy's a Rocky Raccoon.
Yeah, I wouldn't put Revolution 1 on there. I wouldn't put... what about Your Blues? Where does that go?
No, I'd put Your Blues, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you put it on there? Okay.
Probably leave off Birthday. There's a few that are sort of 50-50, like Mother Nature's Son, Sexy Sadie.
Well, that would be a definite for me. That's one of my favorites, actually, Mother Nature's Son, yeah.
What else?
Well, Julia would have to. I'd put Mother Nature's Son and Julia in there.
For sure, and then maybe leave off I Will. Leave off I Will.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally love Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey. It's one of those things I heard it struck me when I first heard the White Album, because I used to listen to the White Album, actually, on headphones. It was one of the last Beatles albums I heard. And I used to listen to headphones late at night, and I just found it so spooky, I'd probably leave off Good Night. Cry Baby Cry is a bit, not sure, but
I'd put Good Night on there. I mean, it's such an obvious closer.
Well, of course, if we're talking alternate universe, we could have the a cappella version, couldn't we?
Right.
We're doing it now. Yeah. On that subject, the White Album has become my favorite Beatles album now. That's not even to say it's the best, because the other albums do other things better, but I think that box set, it wasn't so much the new mix, but all the box set and everything just cemented it somehow. And I just love it. I have a soft spot for Rubber Soul, because I think Rubber Soul is the best. I have a soft spot because you can sit with an acoustic guitar and play the whole album, which is very different.
Right.
Very difficult with anything after Rubber Soul. Say perhaps Let It Be, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean, White Album was my favorite for a long, long time, and then I switched and it became A Hard Day's Night. I just like the economy of those songs. You know, they're perfect. They're just perfect record. There's the only one I wouldn't say is an A+ is When I Get Home. Still love the song, but I recognize that it's not in the same caliber of as A Hard Day's Night and Can't Buy Me Love and I Love Her and If I Fell. I mean, my God, they're just one after another. In terms of fantasy album scenarios, I'm always wanting to fix the U.S. version of Hey Jude. You know, we did some really diabolical things here with Capitol Records. I mean, they're just, and that album, I mean, it's a compilation, obviously, but it's just so strange. And it's just, I get some of the thought behind it. And there is a friend of mine on Facebook who not only defends the record, but considers it one of the most important releases in Beatles history.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know. He had a whole litany about it, how it was so important. But to me, there's all those extraneous songs like The Inner Light that we mentioned, and even the songs on, Yellow Submarine is sort of, I mean, that's an album that needs fixing.
Yeah, you could, I think it was the Beatles Naked. They did a John Lennon 1968 episode and then a Paul McCartney 68.
Right.
And I think the John Lennon one, we said that you could concede, maybe it wasn't them. I did a show actually with Kit and Ken McNabb where we were counting down. We sort of said John Lennon 68 and we included Across the Universe. And if you've ever seen, I mean, that version with the footage of India on the anthology, I mean, that for me is just the most beautiful music video, quote unquote. So you could have Across the Universe, you could have Hey Bulldog, you could have The Fast Revolution. I mean, geez, what an album that is.
Right. Well, that Across the Universe, that anthology version of Across the Universe, apart from the vocal take, is not as great as a later vocal take because he kind of slurs some of the words. But musically, that version is just perfect. Like when I think of a definitive Across the Universe, it's that one of the four that are floating around officially. That's really the one.
I remember there's a bit of the video with, Pattie Boyd was just beyond gorgeous for me. Yeah. Jane Asher was nice, Cynthia was nice, Maureen was nice, but Pattie Boyd was just out of this world. There's a bit, I'm doing this action, you can't see it and the listeners can't see it. She's got something painted on the palm of her hand, something Indian looking or spiritual looking. She shows it to the camera. But that footage with that song is just amazing. So if we're playing around with the White Album, I think a John Lennon, I don't know if they could even officially release it, a John Lennon 1968 solo album and a Paul McCartney one. And you could really play with it. You could bring in a couple of demos here and there.
Sure.
So, Paul, I hope we've answered your question.
I want to change my answer about the Beatles memorabilia.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the Boyd sisters.
I thought you could say White Album serial number 1 as well. Well, no, I'd take one of the Boyd sisters, yeah.
And there's enough to go around, so everybody's happy.
Oh, God. So, friends and Ghosty, we're actually finishing this session as well because it's getting a bit late in England, but we're about halfway through. So we're going to sign off for part 1. So this is going to be a 2-parter. We were planning to do quite quick fire answers, but, we get in the flow and there's so much to talk about. You just have to enjoy it.
Things happen.
Shit happens, yeah. Okay, so thanks, Ghosty. This is the end of part 1, and you will be back very soon for part 2. So thanks to you and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thanks to everybody for those great questions.
Yeah, and there'll be another, what have we got, 13? Another 13 questions.
Okay.
Plenty more. So, we'll be back soon, and thanks again for listening, and goodbye. This meeting is being recorded. Thank you for telling me.
You have my approval.
It's so funny, mate.
That's funny.
In the supermarket.
It's like I wouldn't be here.
With the supermarket in Sainsbury's, every time you scan an item, it says, item successfully scanned. It's like, I know.
Right.
I heard the
Yeah.
beep. Leave me alone.
Right. I like the one here goes, please wait for your change. Really? Oh, that's a good idea. I was going to leave and let you keep everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't leave your belongings unattended. Oh, damn. I was planning to.
Right. Yeah.